war. There were statements made, well, you Russians, you communists had better not move into Indochina because we'll do something serious. You better not or else. That was the threat. Dulles made an official statement to that effect, that they hadn't better push into Indochina or, and never finished the sentence. Well, you all saw what happened. The communists did move down in Indochina, and nobody was there to help take up the battle, to help the French, who of course were guilty of many sins of omission and failing to recognize what the British long ago recognized, and that was to abandon colonialism via the political and governmental route and just keep up the economic ties. The French were insisting on keeping up their political ties, and it cost them Indochina, probably economically as well as politically. So nothing happened in Indochina. The United Nations did not go in. Of course, there's a point in the Constitution that says that they won't furnish anything except upon request, and nobody actually requested it. The French did make requests of the United States government, but it was decided that would be a case of too little and too late, so the U.S. did not go in. But the main point to remember is that there was a war, a full-scale war, and if the United Nations is an effective instrument of collective security, why didn't it step in? On the Korea issue, it was, if the United Nations was an effective instrument of collective security, why wasn't it able to furnish overwhelming superiority that it could have furnished in forces? Why didn't it go in to win a victory on the battlefield? Why did it let the situation merely continue to have exactly the same situation now that you had at the beginning of the war, except that South Korea is pulverized, and you have permitted the North Koreans to build up airfields and everything else, and they're all ready to go the minute anybody relaxes. The only instances of the UN being effective in collective security and in helping to obtain a peace were early in its stages in Iran in January 1947, when there was some threats in the province of Azerbaijan between Iran and Russia, and the UN did make a pretty forceful declaration that Russia should see that they moved back, and they did. That's one point in their favor. Then there was Indonesia, in which the UN was a mediator, and Palestine is also held up as an example, but I don't think anyone could say that the unrest is over in Palestine. It's another situation of a ceasefire between the Arabs and the Israel state. And perhaps you can, I think you can follow the history of the United Nations from its inception up to the point where the United States decided to go in and help Greece and Turkey resist and drive out the communist fester there. When they did that, they didn't go in as part of the United Nations, they went in unilaterally. When Van Fleet went over there as a general, he went in as advisors, and the U.S. Army officers went down to battalion and company levels and helped conduct the war. But it wasn't a United Nations action. From that point on, the U.S. apparently, in its foreign policy, has not relied upon the United Nations. We have now today the threats of the atomic bomb, the uranium bomb, and the hydrogen bomb, but the United Nations can take no credit for the fact that neither of the Russia nor U.S. has dropped a bomb on the other. The deterrent has been retaliation. The fact that either one is ready to retaliate. The fact that we have a strategic air force, a tactical air force, and submarines ready to launch retaliation immediately, and the fact that Russia also has a good bomber force. Those are the facts that are keeping the bombs in stockpile and not in use, not the United Nations. The United Nations, the last time I was there, it was in 1947. The most impressive thing about the United Nations to me is the way they managed to translate all the languages so that anybody can go in there and understand what is being said at the same time. With the cooperation of the international business machines, it is possible to sit down in a chair there and flip selectors at your seat and tune in on the translation of, if a Chinese delegate is talking, you can flip a button and hear what he's saying in English by the translator, who keeps almost simultaneously. Now that's the biggest accomplishment that I've been able to understand about the United Nations. The fact that it has these other organizations, I've got them here so I didn't have to memorize them, the specialized agencies. Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations does a good job in gathering information and keeping the rest of the world informed of the food situation. United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, in which Senator Mundt had a hand in setting up, UNESCO, has not had a good, I don't think it's had a concrete record that you can point to of accomplishment. International Civil Aviation Organization, International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, International Monetary Fund, World Health Organization, Universal Postal Union, International Telecommunication Union, World Meteorological Organization. Lots of those parallel functions of our own State Department, our own, for example, our own Point 4 programs. I think it was I'm sorry, I can't remember the nation it was, Liberia or someplace, one of the nations in Africa, where at one time Chicago Daily News correspondent found out there was a Point 4 program from the United States going on, a United Nations team doing the same work, and a U.S. military mission doing the same work. All financed, two of them financed wholly by the U.S. taxpayers, and the third, the United Nations, financed a great deal by the taxpayers. The United Nations, headquartered in New York, may not be too good an idea to keep it there permanently. In fact, what's wrong with the idea of moving it around for a while, rotating it, send it over to Moscow for a while, let them be subject to all the various speeches and be responsible for showing the delegates there what they have in Moscow. Why not move it to London for a while, move it to Paris? I've heard that half seriously proposed, and I don't think it's too bad an idea, because we have, right here in the United States now, we are constantly subject to the barrage of propaganda from every speaker in the United Nations. And how far it gets out in the rest of the world, I don't know, but I doubt that it gets very far. England has some good newspapers, France has some lousy ones, and India has some good ones in the big cities, but not outside of that. You can call a roll further of some pretty literate nations and a lot of illiterate ones, but how much actual truth do they get about what's going on in the United Nations, and how much of both sides do they get? One other point I think you have to be mentioned in connection with the United Nations, and that is the fact, we won't say fact, the allegation made from many people that it is influenced by communist sources. Now, I won't make that charge exactly, but there are some things to point out about it. The latest charge was made by Henry Cabot Lodge himself yesterday, Saturday, in a speech in which he charged the director of UNESCO with failing, after several warnings, to get rid of 8 United States citizens for suspicion of not being loyal to the United States.